says the West stands to lose assets worth at least $288 billion if frozen Russian assets. Well, according to the RIA, the top investors in the Russian economy include Cyprus with more than $98 billion, the Netherlands with $50 billion and the UK with nearly $19 billion. It also reports that Germany has $17 billion invested, France $16 billion and Italy almost $13 billion.
In a shocking turn of events, Russia has just frozen billions of dollars worth of European Union assets. This bold move, executed in October 2024, marks a significant escalation in the ongoing economic conflict between Russia and the West. While the exact amount hasn't been disclosed, it's likely in the tens of billions, based on the scale of EU asset freezes against Russia in recent years. Subscribe to GeoFlux to find the latest updates about global economy and finances. Now, you might be wondering, why is this happening? Well, it's all part of a tit-for-tat strategy. Russia's action is seen as retaliation for the EU's ongoing sanctions and asset freezes against Russia, which have been in place since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. To put this into perspective, the EU had frozen around $300 billion in Russian assets as of 2022. That's a staggering amount, and it's been a thorn in Russia's side for years. Let's break down what's actually been frozen. The assets of major EU banks operating in Russia have been targeted, with Austrian, German, and French banks bearing the brunt of this financial assault. This isn't just a minor inconvenience. It represents a major escalation in the financial warfare between Russia and the West. And here's something to keep in mind. There are growing concerns about whether US assets could be next on Russia's hit list. So what's driving Russia to take such drastic measures? Well, there are a few key motivations at play here. First and foremost, it's a clear act of retaliation. The Western sanctions have crippled the Russian economy, and this move is Russia's way of saying, we've had enough. But it's more than just revenge. Russia is also trying to gain leverage against the EU, hoping to force them back to the negotiating table on sanctions. It's a high-stakes game of economic chess, and Russia just made a bold move. But there's another angle to consider. This freezing of assets isn't just aimed at the EU, it's also a warning shot to the US and other Western nations who have frozen Russian assets. It's as if Russia is saying, look what we can do. You're not the only ones with financial power. Now let's talk about the impact and implications of this move, because they're significant. First off, it's a major blow to the affected EU banks and businesses operating in Russia. These companies are now caught in the crossfire of this economic war, and the consequences could be severe. We're talking about potential job losses, financial instability, and a whole host of other problems. But the ripple effects go far beyond just these companies. This move could lead to further escalation in sanctions and asset freezes on both sides. It's like a game of economic ping pong, with each side hitting back harder and harder. And with each volley, the economic uncertainty and geopolitical tensions between Russia and the West increase. Here's something else to consider: the potential for US assets to be targeted next. If Russia decides to go down that road, we'd be looking at a dramatic escalation of this conflict. The US has significant economic interests in Russia, and any move against those would likely provoke a strong response from Washington. Now, in the midst of all this financial turmoil, the EU has made a bold move of its own. In September 2024, just before Russia's asset freeze, the EU announced a $35 billion loan to Ukraine. But here's the kicker: they're using frozen Russian assets as collateral. It's a groundbreaking initiative, essentially making Russia pay for Ukraine's reconstruction and support its budget during the ongoing war. Let's break this down a bit. The profits generated from these frozen assets are estimated at $2.53 billion per year. That's not chump change, and it's going to be used to service this loan. The EU is billing this as a way to provide much-needed fiscal space for Ukraine to fund defense, healthcare, energy repairs, and other critical needs. But here's where it gets really interesting. This move by the EU is essentially doubling down on its support for Ukraine, despite Russian financial retaliation. It's a clear message: we're not backing down, no matter what you do. And it's this kind of resolve that's shaping the current geopolitical landscape. Of course, this loan plan isn't without its obstacles and risks. One of the biggest potential hurdles is Hungary. As an EU member state, Hungary has the power to veto the extension of asset freezes, which could jeopardize the loan repayment plan. It's a reminder that even within the EU, there are differing opinions and agendas when it comes to dealing with Russia. But here's an interesting legal wrinkle. Even if Hungary does veto the asset freeze extension, the loan can still proceed. It's a testament to the EU's determination to support Ukraine, no matter what obstacles are thrown in their path. Now, as you might expect, Russia is far from thrilled about this plan. They've strongly objected to the use of their assets and have warned of a painful response. And that's where the asset freeze comes in. It could be the first step in a series of retaliatory measures, with more to come. It's a high-stakes game of economic brinkmanship, and the stakes keep getting higher. But it's not just about the money. This conflict is also about the principles at stake. For the EU, supporting Ukraine is about standing up for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right of nations to choose their own path. For Russia, it's about asserting their own power and influence, and pushing back against what they see as Western encroachment. So, where do we go from here? Well, much depends on the EU's resolve in maintaining pressure on Russia via sanctions and support for Ukraine. Will they stay the course, even in the face of Russian retaliation? Will they find ways to navigate the legal and political obstacles that stand in their way? And what about Russia? How far are they willing to go in this economic war? Will they continue to target EU assets, or will they escalate even further, perhaps even targeting US interests? These are the questions that will shape the geopolitical landscape in the months and years to come. But one thing is clear. The economic war between Russia and the West has reached a precarious new stage. With billions of dollars in assets caught in the crossfire, the stakes have never been higher. It's a conflict that's being waged not with tanks and missiles, but with banks and balance sheets. And it's a conflict that has implications far beyond just Russia and the EU. It's about the future of the global economic order, about the balance of power between East and West, and about the principles that will guide international relations in the 21st century. So, as we watch this conflict unfold, it's important to keep the bigger picture in mind. Yes, the asset freezes and loan plans are significant in their own right, but they're also part of a much larger struggle, one that will shape the world we live in for generations to come. Now let's take a step back and look at some of the broader geopolitical implications of this conflict. Because make no mistake, this isn't just about Russia and the EU. It has the potential to reshape the global economic landscape in profound ways. First, there's the risk of further escalation. If Russia decides to target US assets, it would mark a dramatic escalation of this economic warfare. The US has been a key player in the sanctions regime against Russia, and any move against US interests would likely provoke a strong response from Washington. But even if the US isn't directly targeted, the conflict between Russia and the EU has the potential to spill over into other areas. We could see increased volatility in global financial markets. As investors grapple with the uncertainty created by this economic brinkmanship, we could see shifts in currency preferences and reserve holdings, as countries seek to insulate themselves from the fallout. And then there are the broader implications for European security. This conflict has already strengthened the resolve of NATO and other Western allies, who see Russia's actions as a threat to the post-World War II international order. But it's also sparked debates about how far the West should go in supporting Ukraine, and what the endgame of this conflict should be. These are complex issues, with no easy answers. But one thing is clear. The economic war between Russia and the West is not just about money. It's about power, principles, and the future of the international order. So, what could the future hold? Well, there are a few potential scenarios to consider. One possibility is a negotiated de-escalation. This would likely require concessions from both sides, perhaps in the form of sanctions relief from the West in exchange for a pullback of Russian forces from Ukraine. But getting to that point would require skilled diplomacy and a willingness to compromise, both of which have been in short supply in recent years. Another possibility is further escalation. If Russia continues to target EU assets, or if they expand their economic warfare to other sectors, it could lead to a tit-for-tat cycle of retaliation that would be difficult to break. We could see the development of parallel financial systems, as countries seek to insulate themselves from the risks of a globalized economy. And then there's the potential for long-term economic realignment. This conflict could accelerate the trend towards de-dollarization, as countries seek to reduce their dependence on the US-led financial system. It could lead to the development of new economic blocs, as countries seek to align themselves with like-minded partners. These are all possibilities, not certainties, but they underscore the high stakes of this conflict and the potential for it to reshape the global economic order in profound ways. Now, I want to touch on a few related topics that are important to consider in the context of this conflict. First, there's the issue of cryptocurrency and sanctions evasion. As the sanctions against Russia have tightened, there's been growing concern about the use of digital assets to circumvent these restrictions. It's a complex issue with no easy solutions. On one hand, cryptocurrencies offer a degree of anonymity and decentralization that could make them attractive to those seeking to evade sanctions. And there's evidence to suggest that Russia has been exploring the use of digital assets as a way to mitigate the impact of Western sanctions. But on the other hand, the cryptocurrency market is still relatively small and illiquid compared to traditional financial markets. And there are efforts underway by the international community to close the loopholes that could allow for sanctions evasion through digital assets. It's an issue that will likely continue to evolve as the conflict between Russia and the West plays out. But it's one that policymakers and financial regulators will need to watch closely, as the stakes are high. Another related topic is energy security in Europe. The conflict with Russia has underscored Europe's dependence on Russian oil and gas, and has sparked a renewed push for energy diversification. We're seeing efforts to accelerate the development of renewable energy sources, as well as to find alternative suppliers of fossil fuels. But this is a complex and long-term challenge. Europe's energy infrastructure is deeply intertwined with Russia, and untangling those ties will take time and significant investment. And there are geopolitical considerations at play as well, as countries seek to balance their energy needs with their strategic interests. It's an issue that will have significant implications for the future of Europe's economy and security. And it's one that will likely continue to shape the contours of the conflict with Russia in the years to come. Finally, I want to touch on the role of China in this conflict. China has been walking a tightrope when it comes to Russia and the West, seeking to maintain its economic ties with both sides while avoiding getting drawn into the conflict directly. But as the economic warfare between Russia and the West escalates, China's balancing act is becoming increasingly difficult. There are signs that China may be leaning towards increased economic cooperation with Russia as a way to offset the impact of Western sanctions. But this is a risky strategy for China. They have significant economic interests in the West, and any move to align too closely with Russia could jeopardize those ties. It's a delicate balance, and one that will require careful diplomacy and strategic thinking from Chinese leaders. At the same time, we can't ignore the humanitarian impact of these sanctions. While the sanctions are intended to target the Russian government and key individuals, they also have ripple effects on the broader Russian population. There are concerns about the availability of essential goods and services, and the potential for economic hardship to exacerbate existing social and political tensions within Russia. It's a reminder that economic warfare, like any form of conflict, has real human costs, and it underscores the need for policymakers to consider these impacts carefully as they craft their strategies. As we've seen, the economic conflict between Russia and the EU has far-reaching implications. It's not just about frozen assets or loan plans. It's about the fundamental structure of the global economic order and the balance of power between nations. Looking ahead, the outlook for Russia-EU economic relations is, to put it mildly, uncertain. The asset freezes and counter-freezes we've discussed today have created a climate of mistrust and hostility that won't be easy to overcome. It's likely that we'll see continued economic tensions between Russia and the West for the foreseeable future. But it's not just about Russia and the EU. This conflict has the potential to reshape global economic relations more broadly. We may see an acceleration of de-dollarization trends as countries seek to reduce their vulnerability to US-led financial sanctions. We could see the development of parallel financial systems, with countries aligning themselves into competing economic blocs. There's also the question of how this conflict will impact global efforts to address shared challenges, like climate change or pandemic preparedness. Economic warfare of this scale doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has ripple effects that touch every corner of the global economy and international relations. At the same time, we shouldn't underestimate the resilience of the global economic system. Despite the tensions and conflicts we've discussed, international trade and finance continue to function. Companies and countries find ways to adapt to new realities. The challenge will be balancing the need for economic stability with the strategic imperatives that drive conflicts like this one. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? Well, I think there are a few key points to keep in mind. First, economic warfare is a powerful tool, but it's also a double-edged sword. As we've seen, actions like asset freezes can have far-reaching consequences, not just for the target country, but for the global economy as a whole. Second, the global economic order is not set in stone. It's shaped by the actions and decisions of countries and institutions, and it can change in response to events like the conflict we've discussed today. Finally, it's important to remember that behind all the numbers and policies we've talked about, there are real people whose lives are affected by these decisions. Whether it's Ukrainian citizens relying on EU support, Russian civilians dealing with the impact of sanctions, or European businesses navigating a complex geopolitical landscape, the human impact of this conflict is significant and shouldn't be overlooked. As we move forward, it will be crucial for policymakers, business leaders, and citizens to stay informed about these developments. The decisions made in the corridors of power in Brussels, Moscow, and other capitals will have real-world impacts that extend far beyond their borders. The economic conflict between Russia and the EU is more than just a regional dispute. It's a test case for how economic power will be wielded in the 21st century, and its outcome will help shape the global economic landscape for years to come. So, keep watching, keep questioning, and keep thinking critically about these issues. Because in our interconnected world, what happens in this economic conflict between Russia and the EU doesn't just stay in Europe. It affects us all, in ways both big and small. And understanding these dynamics is key to navigating the complex global landscape we all inhabit.